All right, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for your patience and bearing with us in our technical difficulties. Thank you for Tai Z jumping in and getting us through part of the service this morning. This morning, I'd like to talk just a little bit about our practice. And so in the Buddhist tradition and the Zen tradition, we refer a lot to what we do in the way of Zen or Buddhist activity as our practice. And there's a number of good reasons for this. One of them being the idea that it's not something that we ever finish. As we live through our lives, just as when we look at our diet and what we eat, when we look at our exercise, when we look at things like brushing our teeth, these aren't things that we think of doing with an end goal in mind so that we can stop doing them. Well, I ate well for a month, I'm set for the rest of my life. You know, I exercised until I got into the shape I want to be, and now I'm done. I can just not exercise anymore. You know, and so we don't think that way with those things. And the idea with our practice is to apply the same principle, that this is a lifelong cultivation is a term that's often used, and I appreciate it. But that's not the practice that I want to talk about this morning. What I want to talk about is the practice or practices that we're doing without even thinking about it. Whatever it is that we do more than once, whatever it is that we repeat doing is a practice. And a big part of our Buddhist practice is waking up to see what those unrecognized practices are. Whether we skip getting up in the morning to eat breakfast or to do our morning exercise or our morning meditation. You know, one day, okay, I'm too tired. 2 days, I'm still too tired. You know, 2 weeks, okay, this has now become our practice. Our practice has become not getting up to exercise or to eat breakfast or to meditate. You know, one thought of anger, one thought of sadness, one thought of joy, you know, it arises and passes away. But as we feed these thoughts, whichever ones that we're feeding, whichever ones we are continuing to practice, become our practice. They become a part of our mental and physical health just as much as our diet and our exercise. And so much of what we do, we don't think of as our practice, but it very much is. And it shapes our lives in unconscious ways that our Zen practice helps us to try to make it a conscious practice, so that we can either see, okay, this particular practice I'm doing, whether it's sleeping in too late or whether it's eating the wrong kinds of foods or whether it's having the wrong kind of attitude or addressing people a certain way, we can see that how we're doing those things, and we can start to think, okay, is this practice of mine helpful? Does it reduce suffering? Or is it harmful? Is it contributing to or adding to suffering for myself or for others? And if we can see that it's helpful, then we can put more conscious effort into keeping it up and to continuing that practice, just as we would hopefully try to continue with a healthful diet or exercise regime. And if it's harmful, if we find that it is not helpful, that it is contributing to our own suffering, to the suffering around us, then now that we're aware of it, we can work to try to stop that. You know, now that we see, wait a minute, you know, the world looks like a crappy place because every morning I wake up and think, God, what a crappy world. You know, instead of waking up and looking at it differently, thinking, okay, maybe the world is just a place, and my thought or attitude about it, my practice of how I'm looking at it is shaping, you know, the way that I'm moving through life. You know, as an old semi-joking expression says, if if the world is, if the world is full of jerks, then maybe it's time to look in the mirror and find the source. You know, if the world is full of happy people, the same thing applies. You know, we are receiving back what we're putting out. What we are practicing gets reflected back to us as surely as what everybody else practices reflects, reaches us and reflects back to them. And so in this sense too, our practice is certainly not just about our own personal health, or spiritual or physical or mental, but about the health of those around us, the health of those around them, and so on, radiating out just as the ripples from a stone in the pond, they move out from that action. Okay? And so what I want to encourage that we all do is that absolutely whatever our Zen and Buddhist and meditation practice is, keep our effort with that. Is from my experience, it's helpful and always has been that I've been doing it, but also to expand our notion of our practice to not just what we're doing on Saturday morning or what we're doing when we walk into a temple or sit on a cushion, but extend our practice to what we're doing at any given moment, at any given time. And think, is this something that's just happened once, or is this something that I'm doing over and over again? Something I should be paying attention to whether or not I should be doing it over and over again. And that is when I think our practice becomes real. It becomes about more than simply engaging in forms and ritual, which are very wonderful and beneficial, but they're not the end all of practice. And so those are my thoughts this morning. Just want to pause to see if anybody has any questions or comments, additions or subtractions. I like to say that rebuttals are always welcome. If anybody wants to speak up, go ahead and raise your hand and unmute. Otherwise, I'll move us on. Yes, sir.
I recently read a book by an author named James Clear, and it was called Atomic Habits, referencing exactly what you're talking about, that the habits we make really shape us as people rather than necessarily setting goals. So for anyone that's interested, I thought that was a really good read and very pertinent to what you're talking about.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. Would you be so good as to type the title and the author into the chat so that people can look that up?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Sister Vidal, is that you recently?
I want to thank you so much for that. That talk was so perfect for me today. So thank you so much for those wise words.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, okay. Anybody in the temple have anything they'd like to say or add, or no? Reverend Dave, could you speak up if you could?
I found personally that if I should just not get to my chair and my cushion and have I formally meditate, it's more incumbent on me to live the Dharma than perhaps any other time. I've got to make sure I am compassionate throughout the day and really being very, very conscious of living my practice in real life, real time. Sit the next to it.
Thank you, sir. Ty Kosen, is there anything you'd like to add, sir?
No, I think you touched my heart well with it.
Thank you, sir. Ty Z, anything you would like to add?
No, Ty, thank you so much.
Venerable Miles, I don't know if you're there. Is there anything you'd like to add? Okay. So if no other questions or comments, and thank you for those that that did have something to contribute here. And I think I'd like to move into closing for this morning. I would like to do the well-wishing prayer. For those of you that know it, please follow along. Well-wishing share. May the suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and the sick find health relief. And may the merit of this penetrate into each thing in all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Mahaprajna Paramita. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma buddhassa. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining in this morning, for your wonderful smiling faces, and once again for your much patience as we went through technical difficulties. I'm going to see if Ty Kozan has any final announcements before we go.